One more time for old time's sake. May I have your attention, please? Good evening. My name is Blair Carmichael. I'm going to be one of your hosts this evening and do a little of the emceeing and introducing of speakers. Both my parents were educators in this province for years and years and years. And my mom taught me something. She said, if you want to get out in time for recess, you got to start on time. So I have come to realize that the mind of people can only endure and absorb what the rear can endure. So we're going to start with our very first speaker. After he has spoken, we will have a few-minute break while we make some announcements, and then we'll go on to our next speaker. I'd just like to clarify so that you know what APP is all about and what it is not about. APP is not and never will be a political party. The Alberta Prosperity Project is an educational arm of a nonprofit society, and its purpose is to educate people on the rationale and the reasoning behind looking at the possibility of becoming an independent sovereign nation, either within Confederation or outside as an independent nation unto itself. The purpose of the APP is to educate Albertans on what has happened in the past, what is going on now, and what will happen should they choose the path forward as being one of independence. So our first presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. He's a brilliant industrial organization economist. Try saying that one fast. And he's also a published author. He's a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. He's co-host of the Alberta Prosperity Project's weekly podcast held on Thursday mornings. The last podcast had over 10,000 viewers. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our own ruin. Here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta, our acting VP of Economics and Youth Chapter Coordinator, Mr. Tanner Naday.
Well, thank you all so much for hosting this lovely evening, and thank you for the barbecue. It was phenomenal. It was fantastic. I had so much fun, so thank you. Now, we just have so much to get through and so little time that I'm going to jump right into the speech. No jokes, which is unusual, but maybe we'll sprinkle some here or there throughout the speech if time permits. We have a problem, and you know what that problem is. We have a problem, and it's that the government in Ottawa is bad, and it's always been bad, and it continues to be bad. It was bad from the start. It was bad in the 80s with the NEP. It was bad in the 70s, and it was bad in the 90s with the GST. It was bad all of these times, and it continues to be bad. But it would be one thing if it were only bad. You see, it would be one thing if the government in Ottawa were wrong, and just wrong, and that was the only thing it was. Because if it were just wrong, you could grapple and you could wrestle and you could discuss with the government in Ottawa. You could try and change its mind, and perhaps you could change its mind. Perhaps if you discussed enough, perhaps if you wrestled enough, perhaps if you presented enough proof, enough logic, enough points that detail your position, you could, in fact, change Ottawa's mind. And they would restructure Confederation to work for Alberta. They would return to the supremacy of God. They would return to a society that's constructed on law, on truth, on justice. If the government were purely wrong, you could change their mind, and perhaps they would do that. Perhaps. But the government in Ottawa is not just wrong. It's more than that. You see, the government in Ottawa is worse than bad. They're worse than wrong. Government in Ottawa, the House of Commons, and I do not say this lightly or facetiously, the government in Ottawa is insane. I suppose they might sue me, but what are you going to do? They're insane. And that's a true claim, and I mean that honestly. You see, you have individuals in government elected into positions in Ottawa, and they learn their ideals, they learn their ideologies starting in school, so young. Government schools, right from the start, right from kindergarten, from preschool, they're taught to worship the state, to worship government. Without government, what would you do? Without government, who would teach you? Without government, who would house you? Without government, who would insure you? Who would clothe you? They're taught right from the start to worship this massive bureaucracy that watches everything they do. And then they're reared up into higher levels of education. They're taught the same thing in middle school, in grades 7 and 8 and 9. They're taught to worship the state. They're taught that socialism is an ideal form of government. They're taught that big government, radical government, progressivism, modernism are things desirable which they should work to achieve and attain. And the same is true in the high schools. This indoctrination only continues, and as you know, it seems to summit at the university. You have all of these politicians in prominent positions of power today who learned what they're legislating in university. There they go. Perhaps they're still innocent. Perhaps they are not yet indoctrinated. And yet they step into the lecture hall and they sit perhaps at the front or perhaps in the middle. And they turn off their minds to listen to a professor lecture to them for an hour and a half on the evils of small government or the evils of classical liberalism or the evils of freedom. And after 4 years, of course, their mind cracks. But they're not set forth into the world. That's the wrong terminology. Instead, those individuals are set loose, like a pack of rabid dogs, into, as I mentioned, positions of power. They go into law, and they go into administration, and as you know, they go into politics. And then they achieve these thrones of power, and from that position, by their scepter, they introduce this ideological insanity into the rest of the country, and so it trickles down, and it affects all of us. Now, that's a bold claim to make, I know. It's not so easy to just say, well, the government's insane, and that's that. You have to prove such a claim, because it's not a small claim. It's not a mild claim. It's an extraordinary claim, perhaps. And so how can you prove it? I can prove it as such. It seems clear to me that government is insane because of the laws they pass, their actions. There's an old author named Chesterton. I love reading him. And he has a quote in his book called Orthodoxy that goes something like this. It says, I'm paraphrasing and I'm using different terminology, but the truth is the same. Insane things do not strike insane men. If insane things actually struck insane men, they would be sane. You look at all of the laws that government is passing. You look at what they're trying to accomplish. You look at what they're trying to do. And the fact that they do not revile in shock when they say such things or pass such laws is proof to me that they are, in fact, insane. Let me give you some examples. Look at the monetary system, for example. They told us month after month and year, well, now soon to be after year, that you could print and print and print money, and you could give it to you for no charge, no cost, and yet there would be no inflation. You could have the central bank, they said, print all the money in the world and play this nonsensical, magical game with the government, where the government says, I need you to print money. And the central bank says, fine, give me a bond and I'll give you some cash. And that seems legitimate. Out of thin air, they told us they can play this game and there will be no consequences, no repercussions. And the reality is, there are consequences. There are repercussions. Look at the inflation we have. Or look, for example, at their arrest of the protesters. Here you have protesters entirely peaceful, courageous, brave, admirable, doing nothing wrong, exercising their constitutional right to protest what they believed quite properly to be wrong. And what were they challenged with? Arrests, fines, bank seizures, bank closure, account closure, asset freezes, all of these things that make no logical sense whatsoever to logical men. But if you are perhaps not logical, then you realize that in their mind it makes sense. And this, in my opinion, was cumulated. It reached its climax with all of these lockdowns. What were we told when government locked down? What did they tell us when we were supposed to stay in our homes and do nothing and see no one and not host, that's right, 2 weeks, not host barbecues, not go to dances, wear masks everywhere? What was the justification? After we showed them science and we showed them opposite views from legitimate, certified doctors, for example, when we showed them all of these things, they said in return, we're doing these things, we're locking you down, we're locking the hospitals down because I am who I am. They stole this quote from the Exodus, from the divine, and they used it for themselves. I am who I am. We're closing because I am. We're closing because I'm in power. We're locking you down because I am. And so you realize the height of this insanity has summited to a position where these men and women in power have decreed and declared themselves to be practically divine, God. Precisely correct. You should be up here speaking. You're exactly right. There's no need to have me speak. Excellent. Now, it's quite clear why this is true. And I know I'm taking a while in this first part. The next parts won't be so long, but this is so critical to understand. These men and women declared themselves practically to be gods. Why did they do so? You see, the foundation of society is truth. The foundation of society is law, or it's one of the foundations, one of the most important foundations. Self-evident laws, objective laws, laws which you and I know are true and exist. You need them. Without them, society crumbles. But you must understand, the purpose of the law is thus. It's to tell you, and it's to tell me, and it's to tell the volunteers at the back, it's to tell the mayor, it's to tell the premier how to act human. It gives you a blueprint, a manual, a book that outlines how to act civilized, how to be civilized, how to act human, how to exist in a kingdom that's higher than the animal. You go outside, you see a mother owl eat one of her young because it's starving, and you say, well, that's nature. But if someone were to do such a heinous and contemptible thing in the human kingdom, they would be worthy of the most severe punishment, and rightfully so, because we live in a kingdom that's different than the animals, and we're told how to live in the law. That law, that self-evident law, that law which shall not be violated, encoded in a proper constitution, tells you how to be human, and it molds the society. So, government had to emancipate itself from that law. The government in Ottawa has rejected that law. They've thrown it out. To them, it no longer has meaning, because their purpose, as you know, or more accurately, right, their handler's purpose is to reshape society into their image. They want to reshape you, and they want to reshape me into a new and contemptible image, which we're not supposed to be. And so they had to throw out the law in order that they might become the law itself. I am who I am. We're locking down because I am. I'm the standard of right and wrong. Now you see how deadly this is, how dangerous this is. Because by doing so, by stepping outside of the bounds of law, of right and wrong. They didn't step into a paradise. They didn't step into a Marxian utopia. They stepped instead into a void, contemptible, cold, merciless, unfeeling, an abyss. They stepped into this area and have traded their humanity for something else. You see, my concern, my present concern, the reason I'm working with APP is not because I fear or I'm afraid of being ruled by bad men and women, even though they are indeed bad men and women. My fear is being ruled by individuals who are no longer men at all. See, by trading in the law, by saying it no longer applies to me, I am the law, you trade your humanity. We're being ruled by mere artifacts. Men and women who no longer know what it means to be human so that they can decide for you what humanity shall henceforth mean. Now, we have tried, as you know, in Confederation to navigate this problem, the insanity of the Laurentian government. We have worked our hardest. We have tried, for example, negotiating. You know this as well as I know this. We've negotiated with Ottawa. We've proposed this. We've proposed that. Premiers have traveled by plane. Premiers have come and gone. They proposed something with oil. They proposed something with plastics. They proposed something with the rest of the provinces. They do all of these things. They've tried all of these things. We've tried all of these things. And yet nothing has changed. 10 years ago it was true. 20 years ago it was true. 30 years ago it was true. 70 years ago it was true. It's always been true. No matter how much you negotiate, no matter how hard you try, you cannot influence the decisions of Ottawa. We do not possess the leverage. Confederation was set up in such a way to ensure that we do not possess the leverage. It was set up in such a way that you and I might realize or understand that Alberta is nothing more in the eyes of Ottawa than an engine, an economic engine, providing the power for the actual Confederation itself. But you understand, and I know, that an engine has no thought. It does what the driver wants it to do. It has no say in the matter. When the driver steps on the fuel, the engine increases. When the driver releases the fuel, the engine slows down. And so all of this was set up in such a way that Alberta might do what Ottawa wants it to do, produce. But not too much, otherwise you'd build more pipelines. At any rate, we're seen as this engine. Well, then we try with voting, we say. Maybe we'll change the Constitution. Let's try and vote our way out of this mess. After all, we live in the blessing of a democracy. Only the fewest of societies, of generations, have ever been able to enjoy in the whole of history. And we have an opportunity, at least in some capacity, granted to us to vote. So maybe we'll try and change it. But you can't. How? Look at the distribution of votes. You look at PEI, for example, and you realize that one MP in the House of Commons represents 41,000 individuals from Prince Edward Island. But then you scrutinize Alberta, and you realize that one individual in the House of Commons from Alberta represents 120,000 individuals. And you see that there's this massive discrepancy, this massive differential in the voting power of those in the East versus the voting power of those in the West. And there are reasons for this. There's a senatorial clause and a grandfather clause and every other clause you can think of. But the fact remains, the distribution of power is not equal. And this is made, of course, all the more evident when you look at the populations of Quebec, of Ontario, of the eastern provinces compared to the West. And so you can't vote your way out. Well, then perhaps you can change the Constitution. Again, you cannot. It's impossible. This is not my word. This is the words of a man named Richard Albert from the University, I believe, of Texas, who said, when you look at all of the factors that are required to change the Constitution, when you take every single factor into account, you realize that constitutional amendment in the country of Canada is impossible. You cannot do it. You say, why is that? Well, you read how you have to change the Constitution. First, If you want to change the Constitution, say to eliminate equalization from the Constitution, you have to get the approval of 50% plus of the House of Commons. They have to approve and vote to open the Constitution and change it. It's a rough start. But then suppose by miracle, you pass that, then you have to get the Senate's approval. The exact same thing, 50%. Open the Constitution and change it. If you pass that, then you must get 7 out of 10 provinces, representing 50% of the population voting in favor. That means you must have at least one of Ontario or Quebec voting for you to open the Constitution and change it. And then, of course, you must navigate Quebec's regional veto, which was granted to them as a consequence of remaining in Confederation. And who here thinks that will happen with equalization? And then finally, of course, you have to maneuver around the Supreme Court, which you cannot. You have 9 justices. 6 of them, 7 of them are from the East. 2 of them are from the West. And so you see the discrepancy of power. Well, finally, we'll try the Sovereignty Act, I've heard, and that's becoming increasingly popular. Now, there are some aspects of the Sovereignty Act that the APP likes. That's true. And we need our own version of a Sovereignty Act. That's correct. But there is a problem with the present Sovereignty Act that's being proposed. What's the problem? Let me explain it for you like this. Suppose the Sovereignty Act is passed in Alberta. That's a big step, but suppose it happens. Suppose that the government of Alberta says, Ottawa, to you, and they snarl like a bulldog. Like every premier has snarled like a bulldog to Ottawa when they come into power. We're no longer collecting carbon tax. We're not doing it. 0 cents per liter in Alberta, as it should be. Well, on the other side of the system, you have Ottawa, who certainly will not take such authority lightly. And it's undoubtable that they'll reply, no, you will take the carbon tax. You will collect it. We will get our money. This is not your jurisdiction. And the Sovereignty Act and the Alberta government will say, yes, it is. And Ottawa will say, no, it's not. And they'll have a back and forth. Presumably, Ottawa could start withholding transfer payments, billions of dollars every year. As you know, we send them 60 billion. We get back in the area of 30. It varies. We need that money. And so it's very easy for them to just withhold a couple of billions of dollars. But if that doesn't happen, or perhaps in conjunction with that, Ottawa can say, fine, it's going to the Supreme Court. And that's not a day ruling. It's not a month ruling. That will stay locked up for a decade, for years. We don't have years. And that's just for a carbon tax. And even when that's resolved, even when that problem, just the carbon tax, is resolved, how do you suppose the Supreme Court will rule? You know, and I know. And that, again, that's just the carbon tax, let alone all of the other constitutional matters they propose to take control of. So then, what are we doing here? What is the solution? What's the sanity? That's the question I want to answer. What is the sanity? Independence, as you could probably guess. I am a proponent of independence. The APP believes that freedom and prosperity comes through independence. Alberta needs its independence. That's why we exist, and we need it now. It's been 116 years, and you see and I see what's looming on the horizon. It's a storm cloud, and it's not small. It is this ominous, all-encompassing hurricane, not just of one government, not just of 2 governments. This whole omnicompetent technocracy that men and women in the shadows are pushing their hardest to introduce across the world. So we need independence. How do you do it? What are the steps? Is there a logical, rational way you do it? There is. We spent thousands of hours vetted through constitutional lawyers, vetted through brilliant men and women to determine the steps. They are thus, and this is oversimplified. You can read the rest on our website if you haven't already. The first thing you have to do is educate as many Albertans as possible on the benefits and merits of independence. That, to me, seems self-evident. You must do so. There are still countless Albertans who do not understand, who have not researched, who do not know of the benefits and merits of independence, of which there are many. Now, step 2 is to plant and nurture and grow the APP's membership to such a capacity that we compose, and this seems to be the magic number, at least 3.5% of the voting population. Now, I say 3.5% because there was a study completed by a Dr. Erica Chenoweth out of Harvard, where it was said, it was discovered that if you scrutinize and research societal movements across history, you see that if 3.5% of a relevant population is actively engaged in one specific movement, they will direct and drive the society in said direction that they want it to go. And so 3.5% of the Alberta voting population, which is the relevant population, is about 120,000 individuals, give or take a little bit, given on the year. But already we're seeing phenomenal influence. Politicians have come to meetings. You hear politicians using the words like freedom and prosperity, Sovereignty Act, independence, etc., etc. They know there's a movement here. There's something coming. There's something bigger. And they're starting to realize it. Now, the third step, of course, is to mobilize those numbers. You have as many Albertans as possible congregated together in a movement like this, and you exercise your presence. You show the politician who you are and what we think and what we believe and what we don't want but need in the province. And you do so to such a fantastic capacity that the politician recognizes, he or she realizes that in order to be elected, which is what they want to be, they have to get in front of your movement. They must endorse what you're preaching, what you believe. Because if they don't, they realize they won't get elected. This is a famous quote from Klein, who said, as a politician, you have to find a parade and get in front of it. Now, you might counter. You might say, what if the will of the people is not my own? What if it's different? What if the will of the people is to lock my business down? It's a good question. What if, through vigorous propaganda, they're persuaded to support, for example, new restrictions, new passports? The question is welcome. It's needed. But the answer is, this is why we're proposing Alberta become a sovereign constitutional republic. You must understand the necessity of the republic. Because the republic is a governance by law, not by a mob, no matter how big the majority. It's governed by a foundation of law that says no matter what, you cannot violate these precepts. It might be that the whole of the nation, except for one man, thinks, believes. It might be that all men believe that stealing should be legal, and the law says no, it cannot be. Your democratic will disregards the rule of law, and so your democratic will is illegitimate. You have to protect the individual rights first in order to protect societal rights. Now, step 4 is, with said numbers, of course, you must elect an independence-focused government in 2023. And then you have to have a referendum on independence. You must. And you have to have that as soon as possible. The parties can debate when to have that. That's a political question. But it must be held, in my opinion, as soon as possible. You have to hold it now, as quickly as possible. Not 40 years down the line, not 50, as soon as possible. Because again, you see all that's coming. Now, we're often said, well, a referendum on independence, a question like, do you want independence? Well, you're leaving Canada. You're betraying Canada. We are not. Not at all. We're not betraying Canada. We're not leaving Canada. Instead, we're trying to save it. It has been granted to Alberta to lead this movement. It doesn't stop at just Alberta. It goes so much farther than that. Once one province becomes independent and shows the rest of the world, the rest of the country, the continent, that indeed it's possible and that prosperity abounds as a consequence of independence, think of what all the other provinces will do, questioning and wondering and actually acting, as they too look for freedom and prosperity, and indeed procure their own independence. Now, we're also, as Blair mentioned, often questioned whether we are a political party or not. We are not. We are not. That is not our mandate. That is not our purpose. We are an independent educational project with the sole purpose of educating as many Albertans as possible on the benefits and merits of independence. Our nonprofit status means that we're freed from all of this political regulation that ties down the parties and doesn't enable them to speak in the manner that we are. We know that you have to, of course we have parties and politics, but you must also educate the Albertan. He must be educated and she must be educated on the reasons for why we're doing what we're doing. And then, of course, step 5, after you elect this independent government, before the referendum, I should have put this first, but nonetheless, you do adopt your own version of a Sovereignty Act that enables you to take control of things which are legal under the Constitution. What we're doing is you want to make the transition from in-confederation to independence as smooth as possible. We do not want to force a man to jump off a cliff into the water. We want to give him a slide. And so if you can introduce things like your own Alberta pension plan, collecting provincial taxes, taking control of immigration matters, etc., before independence actually occurs, when it does happen, it will be so much more smooth, without hiccups and without bumps. So then, to my final question, how can you get involved to help us achieve this objective? Well, firstly, please consider purchasing a membership, right? These memberships are legitimate proof for MLAs, for politicians, that they need in order to understand the massive scope and size of this movement. The more members we have, of course, the less able MLAs are to dismiss the influence of our movement. The larger the group, the larger explicitly the group, the more the politician is forced to reconcile with the fact that there is a growing number of Albertans who want political change in the province and the country. As well, we invite you to become a member and to become part of our community, to receive updates and information and news and articles and research topics and newsletters and responses to all of these happenings in the province. We were forced into isolation for 2 years, a long, long time, right? But no more of that. Here we are enjoying a barbecue. Here we are enjoying an event. I went to a dance the other day. All of these things that are human and that humans enjoy have to be protected and upheld no matter what. And so that's part of the reason why we exist. Now, finally, some say that by pursuing again independence, we're abandoning Canada. But I told you once, I must tell you again, because it's true, we are not. We're not abandoning Canada. I cannot hammer that point enough. It's one of the strictest critiques we receive. It's the opposite. It's been appointed to you as Albertans to lead the way. Through socialism, government is stealing our capacity to generate wealth, but then demands equalization and enterprise, right? They tell us we're free, you're free, they say, while they seize our bank assets and accounts for supporting a convoy. We cannot go on tolerating this type of treatment forever. We're not destroying the foundations, you see? We're trying to build them up. Alberta is a house of many mansions, and that's true. But right now, those mansions are occupied not by hardworking Albertans, but by big bureaucrats and heavy government, stealing and enjoying the fruits of our labor. It's true. That's why we formed APP. We're not just holding this home steady. We're working, as you know, to make it better and stronger and freer and more peaceful, so that our children will be free from tyranny and their children will be free from tyranny, and that for all Albertans, there will be a house that is built in justice and freedom where there is room for all. Thank you.
Tanner Naday. Give him a round. Come on, a big one. There are volunteers who will be coming around, and you're free to get up and fluff your pillows, because remember what I said? The mind can only absorb what the rear can endure. So you can get up and fluff your pillows. Seek out one of our volunteers. They'll be coming around with clipboards, with memberships, and with the petitions that are petitioning the next Alberta government to do a referendum on independence. We'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back with our second speaker. Thank you. I should also point out that the washrooms are just out through the door. The ladies is at the top of the stairs on If you would kindly take your seats, please, we'll get started with the next part of the program. At this point, I would like to thank Pam and Lyle Charlet for the wonderful food. Let's give them a round of applause, please. I would also like to acknowledge Catherine Maruzik and Tim Hill for their tireless work in distributing the rack cards and the flyers. So give them a round of applause. And I would encourage all of you to consider volunteering and becoming a member in spreading the Alberta Prosperity Project's message. The more people talking about the rationale for becoming independent, the better it is going to be. And the more people who will sign the petition asking for a referendum gives us leverage as APP members to take to the politicians. We do not have any politicians sitting at our table. We are doing what we do as an independent, nonprofit society with an educational arm trying to identify like-minded people who say it's high time to chart a new path forward rather than continuing to do that which has been done in the past and expect a different result. So as Tanner said, the people in Ottawa are insane. They're going to continue to do that which they've done in the past. We don't want to be like that and continue to do what we've always done in the past, expecting a different result. Let's chart a new path forward. And here to tell us how we might be able to do that and share some ideas with us is our next guest. His name is Leighton Gray, and he attended the University of Alberta, earning degrees with distinction in arts, English literature, and law in 1992. He started his own law practice in northeastern Alberta in 1995 that has grown into a firm of 12 lawyers in Cold Lake, Edmonton, and Calgary. The firm is now known as Gray Woke Spencer LLP, of which he is the senior managing partner and head of civil litigation. He has received many awards, and distinctions for his work on behalf of the First Nations people, and is also a member of the Carry the Kettle First Nation in Sintetluta, Saskatchewan. I think that's English. Since 2020, he has acted as lead counsel in several high-profile constitutional cases, including James Coates and Grace Life Church, Timothy Stevens and his church in Calgary, the vaccine mandate cases involving CN, CP, AHS, and the U of A, Mount Royal University, as well as others. You might also recognize his name as one who has had Dina Hinshaw on the hot seat over the past few months over her handling of the COVID. Leighton is a proud Albertan, Canadian, conservative, and a tireless advocate for restoration and rehabilitation of the civil liberties guaranteed to all of us by God Himself and the rule of law in that order, as enshrined under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome with me, Mr. Leighton Gray.
I want to do that because when I was a kid, I used to stay up late and watch the Johnny Carson show. And so I thought, well, when you follow Tanner, you got to have something, right? Tanner's great, isn't he? I love Tanner. I think Tanner's too young to know who this is, but there used to be the late Reverend Billy Graham, the Billy Graham Crusade. Who remembers that? Yeah, and so Tanner has that kind of that old time religion delivery, and so there's a bit of a connection here actually, because my mother was very religious. I used to watch the Billy Graham Crusades on television with her, and I think she had a crush on one of the evangelists who was in the Billy Graham Crusade, and actually this man became my namesake. His name was Leighton Ford, and so I'm convinced this is sort of a secret crush she had on this guy, and so I'm not sure how my father felt about my name. It might have been a kind of a Johnny Cash thing, but Having that name certainly helped me learn the alphabet quicker. I used to get in a lot of fights in the schoolyard over that name. So, but anyway, I digress. But actually, one more thing about Tanner. You know, I was watching. Did you guys see the story that was in the U.S. about this preacher? He was getting really mad at the congregation, and at one point he got upset with them, and he started saying, "You know, you guys really, you guys never got me that Movado watch for Christmas." And I was thinking, these guys like Tanner, I know Tanner would never do this because he's too principled, but you know, some people have this ability, this oratory, where they can just convince people, you know, to pass that plate around and get them a watch. I wish that I had that kind of power over people, but I'll keep working on it. That's my goal. Okay, who here bought a membership? Raise your hands. Oh, well, I would like to welcome you to the club, of which I am let's call me the patron saint. Well, I'm not a saint, certainly not. However, I was going along in life somewhat swimmingly until about 2 years ago, and until I got appointed by the Kenny government to an eminent position. I was asked to serve as a conservative voice on a committee that would select judges. And I said something that the people on the left in this province thought was heresy. I've actually made a pledge online. Now, are you all ready, holding on to your seats? I said that we should be selecting judges because judges have so much power over the lives of Albertans that we should be selecting these people on the basis of their knowledge, their character, and their record of contribution to society. Does that sound crazy? Right? And I said, but this is where I went wrong. I said, we should not have any regard for what the left calls immutable characteristics, okay? Which would be race, color, creed, and any of those things, any of the diversity, inclusion, equity boxes. Well, this got me in all kinds of trouble, and the CBC came after me, and they said CBC asked several legal and anti-racist experts. Anti-racist experts. Did you see what happened in the news recently? Trudeau's yeah. Only Trudeau could appoint someone to be the head of an anti-racist organization who's an actual public racist. Only he could be that stupid. Well, maybe not him. Friedland's probably in there too. So CBC asked several legal and anti-racist experts to review my social media posts and blogs. And this guy, his name is Bernie Farber. He's Trudeau's private hatchet man. And he's the chair of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Did you know that existed? There's a Canadian anti-hate. We need an anti-hate network. Yeah. Like, what does it take to be anti-hate? Pro-love? What does that mean? Anyway, there is a Canadian Anti-Hate Network. Who knew? And he said that he was disturbed on the basis of just pure humanity when reviewing my comments and posts. Well, what did I say? Here's what I said. Number one, I said BLM. This is June 2020. I'm not saying that I'm Nostradamus, but some of this was a little bit prescient. I said BLM, which actually now stands for Big Luxury Mansions, by the way, has been hijacked and funded by George Soros for his own evil agenda. Ooh, really going on a limb there, hey? And what happened afterwards? Well, we all know what happened. George Soros is spending hundreds and millions and billions of dollars getting people elected in the U.S., getting district attorneys elected, funding all kinds of disturbing currencies throughout the world, and he is one of the fiends who is engineering the New World Order that I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So what else did I say? Well, let me find it here. Oh yes, here it is. I said, remember this is June 2020. I had written an article early on in the pandemic, actually in March of 2020, when the Liberal government started monkeying around with the Emergencies Act. And I said, you know what, this is not new. This is like advertising. Everything old is new again. And I said this, and I published an article online comparing the changes that the Liberal government were making to the Emergencies Act to what Hitler had done in 1934 when he created something called the Enabling Act. It's different in German, but which basically did the exact same thing, suspended all legislative action in Germany, and made Der Führer the sole creator of law, and set himself up, in the words of Tanner, as a god. Well, that seemed to have attracted the attention. It seems that I was early onto the plot here. And so Mr. Farber came after me, and they said, well, this is what they said. They said that I said that this was inappropriate because I wrote about how Trudeau and provincial officials had discussed whether to invoke the Emergencies Act, which would give sweeping powers to the federal government. I wrote that part of the Emergencies Act looks an awful lot like its Nazi cousin. Well, that got me in trouble. Okay, so now I'm a racist, I'm a misogynist, I'm an anti-Semite because I said something against George Soros. But I said more than that. I said another post about potential COVID-19 vaccine. I said that the tech messiah, Bill Gates, would have every single man, woman, and child vaccinated and digitally marked like a tattoo at Auschwitz. Was I wrong? I think I'm not good at math. I think I'm 3 for 3. So they saw me coming. So I got all these labels. So the reason why I mention this is not to, puff up and say how clever I am, because there were many people who were onto the Liberals and this agenda, what was going on. I say that to welcome you to my club, which is, according to Ms. Ahir, is the, racist, misogynist, and all the other bad things. So welcome, all of you who bought memberships. Welcome to my club. It's so nice to have you. Group hug. Of course, all this is complete rubbish. And this is the leftist reaction because they don't have any ideas, let alone good ones. And so whenever you attack theirs and you call attention to them, right? It's a shell game. They want you to go look at the kitty, right? Look over there. Don't watch what I'm doing over here. So we're going to give all these names. We're going to attack people. We're going to attack them personally, but because we don't have a discussion about ideas, right? We can't do that anymore. The left's ideas are all bad, and they suck at debate. And that's why they have to attach these labels to you. So we're getting these labels. The APP, I know a lot of people, this has upset people within the APP. I actually see it as a promising sign because it shows me we're getting this flack because we're right over the target. We're right where we need to be, right? And, I think it was W.C. Fields who said that, no, maybe it was P.T. Barnum. No such thing as bad publicity, right? People are talking about the APP, and that gives us an opportunity to spread the word and talk about the good things about APP, which is what I'm going to do. Before I do that, I want to give you an update on the case involving Dr. Hinshaw. It won't shock you to learn that she lied to Albertans. And lying is something that people do commonly, unfortunately. They prevaricate, they fabricate, they exaggerate. But in her situation, what she did is she lied in court while she was under oath, which lawyers call perjury. So we actually have an application that's going to be heard in Calgary on Friday to cite Dr. Dina Hinshaw in contempt because she lied under oath. And in the truth is stranger than fiction category, or under the enemy of my enemy is my friend, the NDP are cheering us on. Isn't that wonderful? Rachel Notley, she was the one who led that whole cancel culture attack. So this is just, it's delicious, really. Okay, so I want to talk to you about, isn't it hot? Isn't it hot? You feeling the climate change? Oh, oh my God. The sun monster. Have you heard about the sun, the prime minister? He's creating, was it the Ministry of Climate Enforcement? He's building an armory. We're going to have officers, climate officers, right? Goose stepping around. What are they going to do? Spray people with ice water? Like, my goodness. Anyway, notes about climate change. Yes, it's hot, but I did a little bit of research on this. There's a famous monument in England. It's called Plymouth Rock. It's been there since 1620. Our friend at the back knows what that is, right? Plymouth Rock. So Plymouth Rock is it's a touchstone, right? Because Plymouth is the place where historically, ships would leave England for all points, including North America, India, Africa. Anyway, there's this rock there. It's been there since 1620. That's a really long time. I mean, that's even older than Joe Biden. And it appears that even with all the heat, the water level surrounding Plymouth Rock hasn't changed at all. It's still sitting there. It's never gone underwater, never been submerged. Who would have thunk it with all the rising sea levels? Similarly, in Sydney Harbor, where they measure this, the unprecedented climate change has caused sea levels at Sydney Harbor to rise approximately 0.0 centimeters over the past 140 years. Yeah, who knew? Here's another one that's interesting on the subject of climate change. I have one here that shows the temperatures in this is from the UK again. It says that in the last year, 2021, about 966 people died from heat in the UK. Guess how many died from cold? Guess. Higher. 60,000 people dying from cold. It's not even close. We shouldn't even be talking about the earth warming. People are freezing to death. Literally. We all know this. We live in Alberta. Okay? So what are we talking about? We're talking about what Tanner was talking about. We're talking about lies. Okay? What's the lie? Well, here's a little quote from Herr Schwab's book, The Great Reset. I'm going to warn you, you're not going to like this. This might keep you awake tonight. He says at least 4 billion useless eaters, obviously all eating beef, shall be eliminated by the year 2050 by means of limited wars. Limited wars, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like Ukraine? Does it sound like Taiwan? Okay. Organized epidemics. Ooh. It's in the book. Organized epidemics of fatal, rapid-acting diseases and starvation. So this begins to start to sound like a plan, doesn't it? Okay. Here's the next sentence. Energy, food, and water, all of which are threatened in Canada today, shall be kept at subsistence levels for the non-elite. I think that includes me. Starting with the white populations of Western Europe and North America, and then spreading to other races. The population of Canada, which is mentioned specifically, and not by accident here, population of Canada, Western Europe, and the United States will be decimated more rapidly than on other continents until the world's population reaches a manageable level of 1 billion. This sounds like a Marvel Universe movie. Of which 500 million will consist of Chinese and Japanese races. Selected why? Because they are people who have been regimented for centuries and who are accustomed to obeying authority without question. That's the plan, folks. It's right there. That's the Great Reset. That's in the first book. There's a sequel. The sequel is even scarier. So this isn't This isn't fiction. This is real. So how does this look like in Canada? Well, the Trudeau government placing a 46% cap on Alberta's current oil production. Does that sound like a restriction on energy? Okay. What about restriction of nitrogen? Our farmers, right? Is that going to impact food production? Well, my understanding is not this year, but next year. Look out. Okay. Now let's talk about the water. Who heard the story about these government these G-men from Ottawa sneaking onto Saskatchewan farms and taking water samples? So what did Mr. Schwab talk about? When he talked about energy, he talked about food, he talked about water. Boom, boom, boom. So this is happening not somewhere in some far off land. It's happening right here, right now in Western Canada, in our backyards. The Great Reset. And it's a big part of why we're here. Now, it's okay to be afraid of this. It's natural to be afraid of it. But I think it's more important that we take action. And that's what I love about the APP. That's why I'm involved in it. Not just because I'm a disgraced former conservative with the podcast, but because I'm concerned. I can see, I've read these books, okay? This future is mapped out for us, folks. And, if Dr. Mojer were here, he would have said many of the same things that my colleague Tanner has said. That the time is now, okay? This is extremely urgent. The provincial election that's coming up next year is the most important one in our province's history. And I agree totally with what Tanner said about Alberta's role. We need to be the leaders. We are the engine of Canada, okay? We are the best of Canadians. Yes, that's boasting, but it's true. Their numbers support it. How about in a 9-year span between 2008 and 2017, having a net contribution of $30 billion to the CPP? How about that? Okay. Most other provinces were underwater. Okay. And we net contribution $30 billion. Could you imagine if we had $3 billion a year for our seniors in Alberta? It doesn't take imagination. It takes vision. Okay. It takes action. It takes a decision. It takes conviction. And it's not going to be easy. And in fact, it's going to be hard. I'm going to tell you how hard. I'm going to read to you something here. There's a monument to the original signatories to the American Declaration of Independence. It says, by signing the Declaration of Independence, the 56 Americans pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. This is no idle pledge. 9 signers of the 56 died of wounds during the Revolutionary War. 5 were captured or imprisoned. Wives and children were killed, jailed, and mistreated or left penniless. 12 signers' houses were burned to the ground. 17 lost everything they owned, and these were wealthy men, successful men. No signer defected, not one, not one. There wasn't a single Judas among them. They kept their honor and like their nation, and it's remained intact through many different challenges. And it's going to take that kind of conviction, folks, to get this done. Is it going to take a revolution? No, fortunately, because there is a legal way to affect this. And a lot of people ask this. They say, well, no, we don't want to separate from Canada. We don't want to break up Canada. Well, folks, this is a story of unrequited love, okay? Or as Elvis Presley once sang, I ain't for no one-sided love affair. And that's what we have with Canada, okay? This is, I call it abusive province syndrome. That's what we have. They've left us, okay? Canada's left us. They've separated, okay? The question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? The relationship with Canada is over. In fact, in a real sense, it was a marriage that was destined to fail. There's a sincere argument that it was never a proper marriage to begin with, okay? And Tanner has explained why. We have been treated like a colony for the East, and this is not going to change. It won't matter who's in power. I had Maxime Bernier in my podcast recently, and he was talking about Mr. Poilievre and his recent popularity. And he basically described the difference between the Conservatives and the Liberals federally, like the old cola wars. Remember? Who remembers the Pepsi Taste Challenge, right? Yeah, once you bite through the crackers and you peel off the label, there's no difference, right? Cola, it's the same thing. And only this does a lot more than just rot your teeth. So how do we do this? How is it done? Well, there's a road that's been paved. Okay, it's one of the only good things about being in the same family as Quebec, because they've faked two attempts at independence, which were, I think, more acts of extortion than anything else. In 1980 and 1995, in the aftermath of the one in 1995, there was a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court of Canada was asked the question, can a province legally separate from Canada? The answer is yes, but. And the but was there has to be a clear question framed, and if the answer is yes, if the province wants to do it, then there would have to be negotiation between the federal government and the province. And there's a federal statute passed called the Clarity Act, and it sets this out. And so the Alberta Prosperity, now we could actually, under international, I've done some research on this, we could actually declare independence. For example, Kosovo did it in the 1990s, and interestingly, the Canadian government, federal government, was one of the first countries to recognize the Free State of Kosovo. And that's something that I would love to mention to Mr. Trudeau and his negotiators if I were at the table, and I hope I am. But the point is, there is a peaceful path out of Canada, okay? We don't have to go to war, okay? We won't have to fire the first shot. But we should be prepared. We should be prepared, and we're going to have to be prepared and persevere, because there is going to be sacrifice. It's not going to be easy. It's a big job, and it has to be done now. It's got to start right now. And it has started. That's what APP is. It's a vision, but it's also a plan. It's boots on the ground, but it takes people. It takes members. And the idea is to get to the referendum. On the subject of a referendum, I should mention, I had, and I'm not saying who you should or should not vote for or support in the UCP leadership race, but I had Danielle Smith on my podcast, and I asked her about the referendum, because that's where we would go, right? And she said she would allow the referendum to happen. She's not for independence, but she is for sovereignty. She has something called the Sovereignty Act, which I'm happy to talk about if you come up and ask me. But she did say that she would support the referendum occurring, which is promising. I had Brian Jean on my podcast. That episode will drop on Thursday. I asked him, this is a teaser, I asked him the same question, but you'll have to watch the episode to find out what he said. So why are we doing this? Why are we doing this, right? Why are we here? Why is it called prosperity? I want to talk about this next. I contend that this prosperity is a very important word. Some of you have maybe heard me speak about this before, have heard me say this. It wasn't arrived at by accident. This prosperity is a very ubiquitous, multifaceted word, and it really encompasses many parts, important parts of the APP platform, and why it is the vision that it is for the most free and the most prosperous nation in the history of the world. Think about that for a second. You want to be part of the most free and most prosperous nation in history? I do. That sounds great, doesn't it? Yeah. That's why we're here. So I want to talk a little bit about this prosperity, what this means. And I'm going to quote a few people from history. Winston Churchill said, "We contend that for a nation to try to tax itself into prosperity is like a man standing in a bucket trying to lift himself up by the handle." And I would say that person isn't Albertan, because we're paying an inordinate amount of taxes in this country. In prosperity, let us most carefully avoid pride, disdain, and arrogance. That's Cicero. Pride, disdain, and arrogance. Who does that sound like? Fancy socks, exactly. Pride, disdain, and arrogance. I would also add insipid, stupid, dunce, moron, morally decrepit, and many other words. Prosperity is not just having things, it is the consciousness that attracts the things. Prosperity is a way of living and thinking, and not just having money or things. Poverty is a way of living and thinking, and not just a lack of money or things. So this is what Tanner was talking about. These governors appointing themselves as gods, right? They're teaching us poverty, okay? They're trying to drive us into poverty. We've been a nation of almost embarrassing wealth and prosperity, and we've lived that. But it's not just things, it's a mindset. And this is why Alberta is perfectly poised to be the leaders, because we think in terms of prosperity. Prosperity is part of our culture. It's in our blood. It's in our soil. It's in our air. It's in our water. It's in the ground, in our energy. It's in our trees, okay? It's everywhere. We're surrounded by prosperity, but it is a way of thinking. And this is why I so agree with what Tanner said. These people are trying to change the way we think, because that's how you change the way people act. Coming back to what Mr. Schwab said, right? If we can change the way people think, the action part is easy, right? That's the easy part. Who you think. Aristotle once wrote, "We are what we repeatedly do." Habit. It's a habit of mind. The habit is formed in the mind. It's translated into action, okay? It's in everything we do. It's very simple. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Robert Frost, the great English poet. Well, we know the road that's been paved for us, right? What is the one less traveled by? That's the road to prosperity. But we have to pave that road, okay? We know what the other one is. Why not try this one? Why not try a different road? That's what APP is saying. There's a different way to do this. Here's some synonyms for prosperity. These are great. Accomplishment, benefit, boom. That's Alberta, boom. Expansion, growth, riches, success, wealth, well-being, abundance, advantage, exorbitance, fortune, good, increase. I love that word increase. It sounds biblical. So what is this vision? What is this vision of prosperity? Well, there's a 10-point vision. And those of you, if you look on your chairs, this was left on all your chairs. If you look on the back, it says our vision. So this is no mystery, right? The APP wants you to know what the vision is. Okay, these are the thoughts that we want you to have, right? Okay, I've told you about the thoughts that Klaus Schwab and those people want you to have. Mr. Trudeau wants you to have. So this is the vision that the APP wants you to have. And this is the proper vision for Alberta, because it's about prosperity. So what's it about? Rebuilding our communities, balancing the budget, eliminating debt, promoting a free market economy, highest quality and immediately accessible healthcare, highest quality education where funding follows a student, First Nations peoples to participate as partners and not as dependents in building an independent nation of Alberta, markedly enhanced Alberta pensions and old age security. That's $3 billion a year. Think about that, what that would be like for our seniors. $3 billion, they've earned it, okay? Honor our seniors instead of having them live in poverty and having people on fixed incomes be taxed exorbitantly. That's what prosperity means in a new Alberta. Honor our seniors. effective, compassionate social programs and mental health care and to deal with and to end homelessness. There's no need for it. Heal those who have been so aggrieved mentally and emotionally by the actions of uncaring federal and provincial elected officials. Hold them to account. We do that too. Taxpayer protection legislation, become one of the lowest taxation countries in the world. Dr. Modry talks about 8%. Imagine that, 8% income tax across the board. Many of you in this crowd, if you are working, work for the government well into July and August. Bring that in for a moment. Regulatory-friendly business environment conducive to the free market. Think about this. Our Prime Minister just recently decided on behalf of Alberta, essentially, that we can't sell our natural gas to Germany. He just decided that. Never mind that the Constitution says that he can't do that, because under Section 92 of the Constitution, the provinces control natural resources, not the federal government. Highest economic output, nations per capita, highest GDP per person in the world is what we would have in a sovereign, free, prosperous Alberta. Environmental protection with sustainable natural resource development. And here we're not talking about climate catastrophe. We're not talking about the sun monster killing us. We're talking about being good, proper stewards of the environment, the way most Alberta companies are now anyway. In fact, we're leading the world by all measures, by all metrics. We have the cleanest energy in the world in Alberta. And that would be sustained. Those programs would be sustained. They would be enhanced in the new sovereign free Alberta. Business allowed to thrive and create jobs and protection of workers' rights. We don't even have the tally, folks, of how many businesses we lost because of these mindless, evil lockdown policies. We don't even have the tally yet. We don't even know the harm. We're just starting to find out damage to things like supply chains. But all the maladies that we're suffering through right now, the rising inflation, the expense of groceries, rising energy costs, double carbon taxes, which is just is just insipid. I wish I'm gonna have to task Tanner to explain to me how a tax can save the environment. I don't get that. But the point is, there is a better way to do it. There's a prosperous way, and that is the vision of APP, to create the freest, most prosperous nation in the history of the world. Is it possible? Yes. Is it probable? It's more than probable. It's necessary. It must happen. And everyone here, everyone listening to this on Facebook, everyone who can hear my voice has to understand this. I'm not trying to frighten anybody, but there's no maintenance of the status quo. That's not possible. These people are coming onto private farms to take water samples, to try to build a narrative around an environmental crisis. If you thought the COVID-19 hoax was bad, and we all know it was a hoax now, we all know it was. The word is out on that. Wait till you see what the climate hoax will be like. It's not about saying sorry. It's not about saying sorry. It's not about apologies. Apologies will do nothing. Holding people to account, that could do something. But the point is, at this particular moment in time, we don't have time for that. The job that's in front of us is we have to mobilize. We have to sell as many memberships as we can. We have to spread the word. We have to educate people about the need, not just the wish or the desirability, but the need to create a new and sovereign Alberta. It's the only escape we have. And Tanner's right. It's not about destroying Canada by leaving. It's about saving Canada. Okay? It's like that first line of Moby Dick. Call me Ishmael. I alone live to tell thee. That's Alberta right now. We can live to tell the tale. We can live and perhaps save the rest of Canada. But it's got to be done right now. We've got to urge all of you to buy your membership, spread the word, spread the information, visit the website, listen to Tanner's podcast, listen to my podcast, gather all the information you can about the new exciting vision for Alberta. It's here, it's right now, but it takes you. It's going to be done by you. It's going to be done by Albertans and no one else. And that's the job. And that is how we're going to achieve prosperity in Alberta. Thank you very much.
Leighton Gray, one more round. Leighton is absolutely correct. It has to be done now. You cannot wait until the next election to just go out and vote. One of the reasons that we in the St. Albert chapter of the APP do regular Wednesday evening meetings at the Terra Pines Golf Course is so that each one of you can come at no charge to yourselves or your guests and bring a guest. The APP started selling their memberships back in February of this year. At this point, we've got somewhere between 8,000 and 9,000 members. That's a great accomplishment in that short a period of time with word of mouth only. But just think about this. If you were to come to the APP meetings that are being held, wherever they're being held, I'm going to put in another plug for the Terra Pines on Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock. And each one of you brought one extra member who became a member, or guest who became a member. Then in September, we'd have 16,000 members. We have 9 months to the next election. We go from, call it 8,000 right now, to 16,000, 32,000, 64,000, 128,000, 256,000, 512,000. That's just in 6 months. If it worked half that well, would we have more than 120,000? Say yes. Yes, we would. Who's it dependent on? Say me. Come on, say me. That's it. The question is not, can you do it? The question is, will you do it? The APP is run on donations and memberships. They travel across this country, I say country because I'm looking forward to the day when we are a country, not just a province. But they travel all across the province doing these kind of presentations. And it's the memberships and the donations that will keep the wheels on that bus rolling and involve more and more people. So I thank you for that. The donation bucket I see is being passed around. Be generous, and we thank you for coming out. I was not real good at school when I was going to school, but I did understand one thing about physics. If you're in one place, you cannot be in another. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your lives to be here tonight and to share with us some of the ideas that the APP is all about. For those who did not come, they will never know what they missed unless you tell them and bring them to a meeting yourselves. So without further ado, we're going to go to our last and final speaker. Our last speaker this evening is Britt Pasachek, I believe it is. Britt was born and raised on a mixed farm east of Ponoka. As the youngest of three and the only girl in the family, she spent most of her days growing up trying to keep up with the boys. She developed a love for running the tractor in front of any implement the spring calving season, and the long endless summer nights of the prairies. After college, Britt moved to Saskatoon just to see if the roads were as bad in Saskatchewan as she had heard they were. And even though they were, she remained a resident of Saskatchewan for the next 10 years. She worked in the transportation industry for several years before she and her husband, Colin, had an opportunity to move to Lloydminster. Knowing that Alberta was where her heart had always been, she jumped at the chance to return. Britt worked in the oil field until 2014, experiencing firsthand the boom, the bust reality that is the energy sector. With the local economy in a slump, prospects for a career looked slim. However, it was during that slump that Britt was introduced to financial concepts that set her on the path to becoming a financial educator. Fast forward 6 years to find Britt helping individuals and families chart their paths forward towards financial freedom, starting with the most important aspect, education. So welcome with me, Britt. She's going to share some ideas about what the new Alberta will look like.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's always fun to come in as the last batter when the game has been won, and I just get to look good. So, because I'm not quite as charming as Tanner, and I didn't think to come through the curtain with such panache, I'm going to start off with a joke. A climber fell off a cliff, and as he tumbled down, he caught hold of a small branch. "Help! Is anybody up there?" he shouted. A majestic voice boomed through the gorge. "I will help you, my son, but first you must have faith in me." "Yes, yes, I trust you," cried the man. "Let go of the branch," boomed the voice. There was a long pause, and the man shouted up again, "Is there anybody else up there?" Oh, that wasn't such a good joke. I'll give you another one later. My husband convinced me that was the best of the best, so we can blame him tonight. We can also blame him for my last name. So, you know, when I get asked to speak at these events, I could go on for hours and hours, and I'm sure that would excite everybody here if I did. But what happens is I get overwhelmed almost by what people need to hear. Because having worked in finance and pull back the curtain a bit as to what is happening to average everyday Canadians, I get mad. And I mean so mad that it almost becomes, it takes control of me. Because I know that everyday Canadians, just like us gathered here in this room tonight, have been at the mercy of financial institutions for much too long. 45% of Canadians currently have reported that they are spending more than they earn. 45%. This was as of January this year. And 40% of Canadians doubt they will ever be debt-free. That is a scary scenario to look down the line towards. In 2022, the federal per-person debt is projected to be $47,000. That is the third highest amount in history, just behind 2020 and 2021. And it's 25% higher than it was prior to COVID. So I'm going to be 40 here right away. And when I was born, October 5th, 1982, it was $3,500 and change was the federal per person debt. It has grown astronomically in such a short time. We are running out of time to right the ship in many different forms. When I talk about finances, I know from looking at the inside of things that we have been the target of financial institutions. One of the things that I get so upset about is that this year, for the first time in 10 years, took 10 years for the government to mandate that banks and financial institutions are no longer allowed to sell you services and products that are not in your best interest. They had to put that into law. June 30th of this year, Consumer Protection Act now protects you from being a target. And I ask people, at what point in your life would it have been okay for you to be a target to the banks? What 10-year period of time are you willing to forgive the banks for bad advice or for targeting you with products and services that weren't in your best interest, right? I asked this question last week at an event. How many people here have read their mortgage document from front to back? Right? There's crickets, and not the kind we're going to be forced to eat, okay? But that's because we intrinsically trust these institutions to be looking out for our best interest. But unfortunately, it's leading us down a path that we hope we have a chance to return from. But when we owe $1.83 for every dollar of disposable income, okay, disposable income is what you get to keep after you've been taxed. We in turn now owe $1.83 for every dollar we earn. People are filling the gap between what they earn and their expenses every single month with credit cards, more and more credit cards, and not understanding how that interest accrues. It's scary, right? Compound interest is a very powerful, powerful force. Einstein said it was the eighth wonder of the world. But if it's working against you, it is going to keep you trapped for life. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they're having to turn to even worse ways of gathering money, and that is going to cash loan stores, right? Those payday loan stores that we all know. In Canada, legally, a company can charge you, a financial institution, a bank can charge you 60% interest. That's right, 60. But here's where it gets even worse. Those payday loan companies, they don't fall under that same rule. They're legislated by each province. And in Canada, your APR, so the yearly amount of interest that you would pay on a loan that you get from a cash store, is 400 to 600%. That doesn't seem possible, but it is. Math doesn't lie. This is what we're facing, right? We are seeing a time when we need hope more than ever, but we need financial education. And financial literacy, I was talking to a gentleman before, it doesn't exist. It doesn't happen in schools. It doesn't happen in universities. It doesn't happen before you sit down across from a mortgage broker or a financial specialist that says, we're going to put you $500,000 in debt. We're going to buy a house. There's no prerequisite to understand what you're actually doing, how much you're going to pay for that house, how long you're going to be beholden to a company. None of that stuff is discussed. So we're targets to the banks. And the only way that we can stop being targets to the banks and financial institutions and insurance companies, that can go on, is to be financially literate. And that is the goal of APP, is to educate people about the prosperity that is ours, the independence and the freedom that can be ours. At the same time, in order for us to be financially prosperous and free, we need to understand and explain to the financial institutions that have had us under their thumb for so long that we get what they're saying. We speak their language, and therefore they actually have to treat us with a degree of respect. A third of Canadians are coming out of retirement to go back to work. A third of our seniors are coming out of retirement to go back to work. Before COVID, the average Albertan was $200 away from not paying their bills every single month. Since inflation has taken its toll, Albertans are facing $450 a month in new bills, new expenses. Something has to give. So people are choosing not to pay certain things on a monthly basis because they can't afford to. Meanwhile, we're watching as banks this week, they're just beginning to announce their quarterly results, their quarterly profits. The first bank did so today, and the rest will follow suit for the rest of the week. And good news, everybody, they've made billions. So happy for them, right? They've made billions, most of it from debt, from keeping us in debt, from interest that we pay. 50% of Canadians say that they aren't even investing because they don't know how. They don't have the confidence. There isn't anybody that they know that they can trust. And we aren't saving enough. It's now considered a luxury to have enough money at the end of the month to put some money aside to save. So we know that another pandemic, another moment where we are caught off guard is going to plunge more and more people into bankruptcy, insolvency, poverty. We need to stop that, especially here in Alberta, where we know that we are hardworking, we're industrious, we've always found a way. So we need to find a way to be financially literate, to make this a conversation that we have. There are rules to money, and if you don't know these rules, look them up. They're not hidden, they're just not talked about. The rule of 72 tells you how quickly your money is growing for you or against you at any moment of any day. Rule 72. Understanding how to pay off your debt to pay less interest, right? Do you think that somebody, that a financial institution who has your debt, who has your interest payments, is going to teach you how to get out of debt faster? That's going to cut into their profits. They're not going to teach you that information. It's out there, it's available, but they're not going to teach you that information. We need to understand the rule of paying ourselves first, treating ourselves like the most important bill that exists out there. We need to understand what an emergency fund is supposed to do. We need to understand that cash is king again, right? That credit is just a way to keep us beholden and in debt and in case basically slaves to the banks. So as I finish, because I know we've all had enough of sitting in this heat and we like to have a refreshment afterwards, I just want to offer a message of hope, knowing that we are currently on this path that seems hard. We're taking a stand, and we're taking a stand to make a difference for our generation right now and the future generations to come. So with that, I'm going to finish off with one more joke, and hopefully this one gets a few more laughs. A taxi passenger tapped the driver on the shoulder to ask him a question. The driver screamed, lost control of the car, nearly hit a bus, went up on the sidewalk, and stopped inches from a shop window. For a second, everything was quiet in the cab. Then the driver said, "Look, sir, don't ever do that again. You scared the living daylights out of me." The passenger apologized and said, "Well, I didn't realize that a little tap would scare you so much." The driver replied, "Sorry, it's not really your fault. Today is my first day as a cab driver. I've been driving a hearse for the last 25 years. What a great send-off. Thank you, guys. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much, Britt. One more time for Britt. To leave you with a little hope, just before we start on the question and answer, we've only got 3 questions so far from the floor. If there are more, please get them to a volunteer and get them to us. To leave you with a little bit of hope, Leighton has talked about, and Tanner mentioned it as well, that Albertans over-contribute by $3.5 billion. That's with a B, folks. That's a bunch. $3.5 billion a year over contribution on our CPP and OAS. The CPP and OAS does not get drawn from a pool of money. It's a pay-as-you-go system. The young folks that are working today are contributing to CPP and OAS, and is redistributed to us in this room who are seniors. That extra over contribution of CPP and OAS of $3.5 billion a year would be sufficient dollars to double every senior citizen's income in Alberta. Would that help with the interest payments? Would that help with paying the inflationary prices at the grocery store? You bet it would. If you could have a doubling of your income as a senior citizen in this province by simply voting for a Freedom Party that promised you a referendum, would you do it? Say yes. Okay. You see, the seniors have been ignored for years. They're not taken seriously. They talk about getting younger people involved in politics. And while that's very, very important, and mid-age people are very, very important, between the ages of 50 and 80 in the province of Alberta, there are 516,000 seniors that would love to have a raise. 516,000. Do you think that maybe 120,000 of them might vote for a Freedom Party promising a referendum? Then the job is done. But we still need you to talk to the younger people, the middle-aged people, and all of the senior citizens that you know. The senior citizens have been locked down for the last 2.5 years now, And the main question that every one of us have had is, what can I do? What can I do so that our children and our grandchildren aren't left with the mess we find ourselves in? APP, ladies and gentlemen, is the answer. So without further ado, if I could get some help and get 3 chairs up here, we'll get the 3 speakers to come back up and we'll answer a few questions that have come from the floor. Thank you. Klaus Schwab said, if we can change the way they think. My question is, how has this been done? Or what is that way we think is he talking about? So maybe you could answer that later. There. Sorry. Okay.
Or do you want to hold on?
I'll hang on. Sure.
I think what I was referring to in terms of the way that the World Economic Forum or the federal liberals want us to think is the difference between prosperity and poverty. Okay. When you are impoverished, you think in terms of scarcity. Scarcity drives fear. Scarcity causes division. Scarcity causes conflict, and it leads to war and misery. So the mindset that's being offered, that's being promulgated, that's being promoted, the group think, the mass psychosis, and COVID-19 is a great example. Okay, it was everybody for themselves, really. Okay. That's the mindset of poverty. That's the mindset of scarcity. That there isn't enough water. There isn't enough, there's enough oxygen. There's enough land. There's not enough meat. And so we have to get rid of 1/7 of the world's population, except for the elites. This is like the Orwell book, Animal Farm, if anybody's read this. There's a famous scene about the pigs. The pigs say, well, we do not eat these fine apples or drink this wonderful milk for ourselves, comrades. We do this for you. But we are the thinkers. You need us. You cannot exist without us. So you must starve. That's the group think. That's the world economic think. That's what's being sold to us. What the APP is talking about is what the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about abundance. Okay, it talks about freedom, and that is what the APP is talking about. It's a different mindset that's focused on prosperity. What can we do to control our own destiny? And that's the difference between what we're talking about and what people like Klaus Schwab are talking about in the Great Reset. So that would be my answer.
Do you need to be a born resident within Alberta in order to take full advantage of this movement, or simply a current resident?
Well, the answer is no. You don't have to be. It's not a citizenship requirement. It's a requirement that you care about Alberta, that you share the vision, that you're willing to become a member, and that you believe in the vision that the Alberta Prosperity Project has for Alberta. That's what it takes. And if you're willing to do that, then we're happy to have you part of the APP.
Thank you. If Trudeau calls an early election, like he did the last time, will that affect us?
Sure, I'll start. Well, yes, of course it'll affect us, insofar as he'll call an early election. And the outcome of that election will, as the last one did, determine the trajectory of the country for the whatever foreseeable future it might be. And so it might transition or change the timeline for independence insofar as it might change the people's appetite for independence. We're working right now, today, with the framework of mind that no matter what, we want independence as soon as possible. We know that we need independence as soon as possible. And we're working as hard as we can to have Albertans believe that we need independence as soon as possible. Now, if an election happens and a prime minister who Alberta does not particularly like is reelected, you might see that trajectory for independence change. You might see the sentiment of Albertans for independence rapidly shift, and they might want it a lot more than they do now. Who knows? I love to prophesy after the event has already occurred. So of course there'll be effects. What effects there will be, I guess we'll see. Who knows? He might call an election, he might not. I don't quite know. Maybe Leighton wants to add.
Well, I don't think I could improve on that answer.
So another question is common law an effective tool in our legal system?
Okay. I have a long-winded answer to this question, so stay with me. And this is going to make me sound like a real nerd, so don't hold it against me. I've been reading a book called The Laws of England that was written by a man named Sir John Fortescue. It was written in the 15th century. And he was the Lord Chancellor of England at that time to King Henry VI. And it's probably one of the most brilliant law books I've ever read. And he talks about how the English system of laws is unique because it combines the English common law with the civil law, which came from France, because William the Conqueror brought the French law to England in 1066. The English common law, though, has made the combination of the English common law and the civil law has made everywhere English law has gone unique. And this is what Sir John Fortescue says. What's unique about English law, and this is the common law in particular, is the English common law is the law of the common people. It's developed through the experience and centuries of really problem solving, of peaceful problem solving over time. And Sir John talked about the difference in his time between the English kings and the French kings. And the basic difference is that the English kings were beholden to Parliament. And because they were beholden to Parliament, they were not above the law. So the rule of law exists in the English system of laws, and everywhere it's gone, Canada, United States, Australia, South Africa, everywhere it's been. And this is why over the past several centuries, the English-speaking countries have been the freest and the most prosperous in the world. The English common law, and this is coming around to answering the question, is a very effective tool for peaceful problem solving. And it's no accident that everything Anglophone is under attack in our society. It's not an accident. It's not, and it's conspicuous that everything that's English is equated with white supremacy. So the destruction and the attacks on the English and the British traditions. For example, just recently, the Law Society of Alberta no longer requires new lawyers to make an oath of fealty to Her Majesty the Queen. I did that when I became a lawyer many years ago. But today, lawyers don't have to do that. So we're whittling away this of the English tradition is simultaneously an erosion of those protections that were afforded to us through the English common law, because that is unique in history, to have kings that were beholden to Parliament. Charles I was beheaded because the Parliament was supreme, and Cromwell held him to account. The Parliament held him to account. He went to his death. That's unique in history. So this English common law is very, very important. It's very important in Canada. It's very important in the United States to maintain this. It's a historical and an actual protection because it's the best system of laws for peaceful problem solving that has ever existed. That's my long-winded answer.
Thank you.
How effective is that if you propose through common law, saying that, you know what, I really don't think that humanity should have to pay taxes that high on land that is supposed to be our own property?
Right. That's a great question. And it, yeah, that's a great question, but it highlights the difference between civil law and English common law. The common law, English common law is not involved with taxation. Its statutory law is under civil law. And that's the law that Trudeau is using to place us into poverty, that he's using to imprison us, okay? This executive abuse of power, okay?
So how do we bring the idea of private property as we own our property, farms and rivers, pull that out from under civil law so we can use common law?
Right.
So that we don't tax out of our own property.
Right. Well, that's the challenge. That's the challenge. We have to, right. Well, it is possible. Well, you have to be vigilant. You have to do, for example, ma'am, I can't answer the questions while you're talking. So I'll let you finish and then I'll answer. Okay. Is there more? Or? Okay. So first of all, what you're talking about is what lawyers call hypothetical. It's very difficult to answer a question like that in the abstract. So I'm going to give you a concrete example. Take the case involving Dr. Hinshaw, Ingram, okay? So here, this is an example of us using the common law, okay, and also the Constitution, which is an expression of the common law, okay? It's a what we call a codification of it, okay? We're using that to hold the government to account, or at least an attempt to do that. So the answer to your question is, how do we do that? Is we do it. We act as though the law has power, it has puissance, that it can hold government to account. We have to act as though that's true. The moment that we accept that the common law does not have the ability to do that, then we are lost. Is the system perfect? No. Winston Churchill once famously said about democracy, it's the worst system of government ever except for all the others. And I would say the exact same about our justice system. It's the worst system of justice except for all the others. No complex system, no matter what it is, whether it's in economics or medicine or military or whatever, no complex system works perfectly. In fact, we're very, very lucky if it works most of the time. What we've had in Canada is we've had systems, complex systems that have worked very well for a very long time, okay? Fortescue also said famously, the man I was talking about, famously said that he'd rather see 100 men go to the gallows to save one innocent man, okay? So that's what we're talking about. We have to trust in the law. We have to believe in it. We have to walk it, okay? We have to walk our talk. If we believe in freedom, okay, our actions have to express that. And so I think what the Klaus Schwabs and Justin Trudeau's of the world would like more than anything else is for us to give up our faith in these systems of law that have worked for centuries. Then they've won. But you're right. At times, some of these legal decisions are very discouraging. And you wonder about things like judicial bias or judicial activism. But to me, that is not, those examples are not reason enough to give up on the entire system. And it would be my view, I would support in a new Alberta to adopt and bring that rich English common law tradition into the new Alberta, because I think it's a very, very essential, not only legal, but cultural part of our history. It's one of the best things about Western civilization. Okay. Well, I hope I've answered your question. Okay.
Thank you. One last question for Leighton. We must move forward, but there must be consequences. For go ahead.
We have to move forward. And I love coming to these meetings because they are filled with the most reasonable, common sense people in the province. But I need hope. We have to move forward, but there has to be consequences for the actions of the recent past. Is there a chance Peter Hinshaw can go to jail?
Did you ever see Dumb and Dumber? Because there's a conversation between Jim Carrey and this. So he says, "So you're saying there's a chance?" Yes, there is a chance. But you raise a great question, and I'd encourage everybody to read something called the COVID Commission report, which was written by a man I admire very much, Preston Manning. And actually, I had Preston Manning. I had the pleasure of having him on my podcast, and he talked about it. And what Mr. Manning envisions is a privately crowdfunded commission that would investigate how the federal government handled the COVID-19 pandemic, based upon 16 fundamental questions that every person in this room could probably write down if I gave you 10 minutes or less. So I agree with you. I agree with you totally. But I think what Alberta needs, what our nation needs, is we need to have this public inquiry. People need to be able to come forward and talk about the damage that was done to their job, to their business, to their family, to their health, to their province, to their country, to their school, to their churches. And we need to have that as part of a healing process. And then in addition to that, as you say, where people have behaved in a way that was criminal or contrary to law, they have to be held to account. This has been done in the past in our country. It has been done in other countries, and I think it's a very, very necessary thing that needs to happen in this country. But having said that, I have to emphasize as well, there's a very important job to be done in terms of achieving this referendum. And I would hate to see us get bogged down into say a public inquiry into the COVID Commission that might distract us from doing the necessary work that needs to be done. I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm just saying in the world of priorities, it seems to me that what we're talking about here tonight is job one. It's urgent. It's equivalent to getting out of a burning building.
Yeah. That's fair. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes.
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 Yes, one more question here.
It's more of a add-on to what you said there. The International Criminal Court, I don't know how legit this is, but they have an email where you can, they're actually taking, all the impacted countries of the world from COVID. They're taking emails.
Okay, try your question again. Try your question again. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Let's dance.
Can you hear me now? No. So what I was saying is, like, with respect to your point where, and the gentleman back here, his point to have some kind of hope and some kind of idea that there can be some accountability for the recent past. Well, the International Criminal Court, The Hague in Europe, has an email. Now, I don't know how legit or valid this is, but they do have an email where you can send in your story of how you were impacted. You lost your job. You weren't able to visit your dying grandmother or grandfather, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that recourse. And with regards to your second point where, it's It doesn't have to be one or the other. I'd like to put forward that it can be both simultaneously, because they're both important issues, in my opinion. We do have to have accountability in this country. It's so long overdue, and that would almost be the impetus to allow for that healing to happen, but also for to get things going with respect to the Alberta Prosperity Project, because that is something that is long overdue for a lot of other reasons. So that's just what I'd say.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Yes.
Come to the front. This is a rare thing.
Okay.
We don't do this
Thank
often.
you. So there's a number of parties that all have the fundamentals of freedom. And I'm wondering, is there opportunity to work collaboratively? Like, does the Alberta Prosperity Project support some of these other freedom-minded projects and parties that are running, such as the UCP? Because I'm trying to differentiate between like Take Back Alberta initiatives and the Alberta Prosperity Project.
I think Tanner's probably a better person.
So if I explain myself.
No, it's good. That's an excellent question. So with regards to parties, because we're a non-profit educational project, because we're an independent non-profit project, a society, we cannot partner with political parties, because doing so would violate our non-profit status, doing so would violate our nonpartisan status, and doing so would violate our societal, our educational status. And so we have to remain neutral. With regards to other groups, we want to congregate as many Albertans as possible under the banner of independence. So, for example, the difference between Take Back Alberta and Alberta Prosperity Project fundamentally is that the Alberta Prosperity Project is advocating for Alberta's independence, Alberta's freedom and prosperity through independence. And the objective of Take Back Alberta is different. On the whole, you will not find another project like the Alberta Prosperity Project in Alberta that fights for independence in the same way that we do. That is what we exist for. Now, that's not to say, of course, that you cannot attempt to try and quote unquote work with those other groups. Sorry, a little bit of feedback, but it's not the same as actually latching to the hip with them. There are so many Albertans that are a part of so many different freedom groups and freedom projects that want what we want, which is freedom and prosperity. Our purpose then is to go to them, to educate them, to hold these rallies, to say, join the APP as well, because we believe that what you want and what we want, the same thing, is only achievable through independence. Now, coming soon on our website is a massive grid. Well, not massive, but a big grid. And on that grid, we'll have all of the political parties. Let's say on the y-axis. On the x-axis will be political issues that are vogue. So, say healthcare, taxes, immigration policy, stance on gun ownership, et cetera, et cetera. And for each of those parties, we're going to give a rating for each individual issue. And at the bottom of that grid, you'll be able to tally up the scores of each party and determine which one, I guess, would be on the side, determine which one most aligns with the Alberta Prosperity Project. So let's suppose, for example, independence itself. Suppose that one party gets a 0 out of 10 and the other party gets a 10 out of 10. Well, one party has scored 10, the other party has scored 0. And so one party is clearly more closely aligned with the Alberta Prosperity Project. And as we near the election, those answers will become more and more explicit, and you'll be able to see exactly what parties and exactly what politicians are jumping in front of the parade that we're creating. So because we're nonprofit, because we're educational, because we're independent, nonpartisan, we cannot partner with political parties. And because we have a specific set of bylaws that dictate and show that we must advocate for independence, we're also not able to, again, join at the hip with other freedom groups that aren't advocating for independence. But what we can do is go to those groups, discuss with those individuals, all of those things, saying, you want what we want, which is freedom and prosperity. We believe the way to do that is through independence, and then go from there. So excellent question. Very good.
One more chance, right, to get it right. Do we or do we not buy memberships and encourage all of our people to do the same? Say yes. Say we do. Absolutely. Okay. That concludes the formal part of our presentation. You're free to stay and visit and mingle. I think there's some goodies at the back yet and coffee. So help yourself and make yourself at home. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much.